Okay, so a little bit about me and a little bit about sort of Agile HR and my history. So you can probably tell that that's not actually me. I wish it was, but that is sort of how I felt about 10 years ago. So I've been in HR for approximately 25 years. So most of my, pretty much all of my adult working life in various different guises, learning and development generalist, um, all the way up to, sort of senior HR leader. I was always quite frustrated with how HR was seen, kind of that complaint that you often hear about HR not being invited to the table, all of that kind of stuff. And I was also frustrated with how long things took, this kind of bureaucracy, and sometimes we can get in our own way. I learned about Agile. My husband is in IT, and I would see him talking and hear him talking about Agile. And I thought that we could do this in HR. That sounds really great. You're iterating, it's very people-centric. It's all about, getting feedback from people. This is great. And for about 2 weeks, I thought I'd invented it. So I was feeling, pretty smug for about 2 weeks, and then I realised that obviously much better people had got there before I did. So we started probably about 10 years ago with the team that I was in, which was quite a big team, and we had about 30 people. But we started following Agile HR practices and methodologies. So when the pandemic came, we were kind of, rocking and rolling in terms of being able to adapt to that big change. We were already set up to work remotely. We had the practices and the frameworks. We were following a Scrum ban kind of methodology, which means that we were sprinting with 2 weeks. I'll go through some of this. And we were also working transparently using a Kanban board, which is a bit like Microsoft Planner or Trello. And if you want to know a little bit more about those, then you can have a look at the webinar I did last month, which really goes into a bit of detail and gives some examples on those. So we were already using digital tools, and it got us a little bit ahead of the game. And that prompted me really, during COVID, I hit 40, I had the classic existential crisis. What does it all mean? What am I doing? And I started up my own business to reimagine how HR gets done. And now I develop leaders using Agile in HR, which I've trademarked, and also help leadership teams and businesses that are going through change and transformation. And I especially am an expert in that remote and hybrid working and making that successful. So I do lots of things: project management, people strategy, restructures, efficiencies. I'm quite technical, leadership, interim, and then change transformations, whether that's cultural or digital. And I also do org development as well. So anything where there's a focus on, people-centered solutions, efficiency, engagement, and productivity as well. So we hold the belief that how we work is the solution to high performance, good mental well-being, and empowering leadership. So we like to connect the practices, the methodology, and the frameworks of Agile into leadership teams to produce empowering leaders that can lead teams to consistently improve, to drive growth, innovation, and profitability to businesses. And we use a framework for that, which is for people efficient, which includes everything that's on there, which I'm not going to focus on today, but everything kind of comes back to this framework. So what is it that we're trying to do? We want to make sure that we're always forward thinking, which means that we have to reflect on what we've achieved and what we haven't. I'm a big believer in autonomy and collaborative connection. Hi Heidi, thanks for joining us. So make sure that we always have that framework. And we know that leadership has evolved. We know that it's, no longer, if done well, that kind of control and command. It's not about, very few people having the only power to make decisions. We know that people want to feel empowered and feel part of solutions. And that includes, making mistakes and coming up with solutions themselves. So It's about, you know, making sure that there is opportunities to give value and feel valued as well. You know, in order to do that, you know, leaders have to be in a position where they're creating spaces for thought and for challenge, for purpose, reflection, and impact. And quite often, what I've noticed that happens with leaders, especially those that haven't perhaps adapted to distributed teams, is that they're continuing to do things the way that they always did them. So they're not using digital tools. They're doing one-to-ones because they think that that's the most important thing. And, you know, they're still communicating in the same way. They're not adapting to people's individual needs. And that can cause, you know, a feeling of micromanagement from the people that they're leading. And it can also cause a real frustration with, you know, with leaders themselves, because they feel quite overburdened with administrative processes, having to communicate, having to keep people happy all the time, because they're doing everything the way that they always did them. So that's kind of what we're going to be exploring today. My dog. Sorry. Somebody at the door. All right. I'm so sorry. Just bear with me one moment. Right. Somebody else has got it. Thank you, darling. You've saved me again. Well done. Sorry about that. This is an interpretation of the Agile HR Manifesto. So it's not that we don't recognise the benefits of the bottom lines, it's that we value the top lines over the bottom. So it means that we value transparency over secrecy. And sometimes that means that, you know, with transparency comes, you know, radical honesty, you know, comes having to, you know, be aware of things that, you know, perhaps aren't easy to absorb, for example. It means using digital tools in an effort to be transparent. You know, but that's something that we value. We recognise that sometimes, you know, we have to, you know, maintain confidentiality, you know, and all of those kind of things. But we value transparency on the whole, for example. We also value things like collaborative networks over hierarchical structures. So with businesses that, you know, have that kind of traditional, you know, manager on the top that makes all the decisions and is the role model that everybody follows, you know, we don't always feel that that's the best way to be. Instead, we like to surround ourselves with people that are experts in their fields, that can contribute to making effective decisions and the right decisions for the end users of whatever it is that the business is building, whether that's a service or a product, and what have you. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So if anybody wants to hang around at the end and kind of explore that a little bit more, then I'd be more than happy to do that. But we do explore that in some of the other webinars that we've got. So let's talk about a little bit more in detail about some of the terms that we're going to be talking about today. So this isn't sort of a catch-all, but I wanted to kind of, you know, highlight for those people that weren't familiar, some of the terms that we're going to be using. So when we talk about a people-centric approach, we talk about, you know, really focusing on understanding what employees need to be successful. So it's about, rather than sort of looking at things from an abstract point of view and saying, oh, this is what the business needs, we actually go out to employees and ask them what they would need in order to be successful. And that means using data, and that also means gathering information and gathering feedback really regularly and making that part of a culture. We also talk about iterative processes, and what that means is that we're building products or building services, and for us that are in HR or in leadership, you know, those you know, employees are kind of like the users, if you like. They're the users of the products and services that we're providing for people. So we do it iteratively. So rather than thinking of a solution that's going to take 18 months, we think about how we can break that down so that we can provide an improvement as quickly as possible. So we do that by perhaps building a product that is giving the foundations of a much bigger idea and asking people to try it or asking people to give feedback. So, for example, if we were building an employee handbook for example, we wouldn't necessarily, if I put it into its basic terms, let's just say the employee handbook was 100 pages. I really hope that's not the case, but let's just say that it was. And we wanted to move that onto a digital solution or a digital platform. What we might do is we might mock up a particular page. We might look at the branding of it, we might look at the layout of it, and we might send that out, and that might be on a PowerPoint slide or something like that, and we would say to people, is this the kind of information that's useful for you? Is this easy to read? Is this laid out in a way that will engage you and make you want to read it? Rather than moving everything onto the platform, putting 100 pages on there, making it all singing and all dancing, only to then find out that nobody's reading it, or it's not been laid out in a very clear way. So it's about doing it iteratively. So hopefully that's a good example of that. And it's also about sort of solving the actual problem. If there's a bottleneck, or if there's an obstacle that's stopping a business or a team from moving forwards, well, what's the actual problem rather than our perception? And then a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today in terms of empowerment and autonomy. We're going to be talking about things like pulling tasks and how the mission is interpreted, and sort of moving away from that control and command. And then something else that's really big in Agile HR is cross-functional collaboration. So it's about aligning missions and objectives, across all functions or departments, and having sort of joined up accountability, peer accountability and responsibility, and encouraging sort of cross-functional and diverse thinking, so that it kind of loops back to that people-centric approach. So the more information and feedback we get, the more likely we are to find the right solution. So I'm going to pause there and just throw open to everybody that is on, and just ask sort of what people's understanding and thoughts are on Agile HR. And that can range from never heard of it before, that's why I've come on here today, to yeah, absolutely love Agile HR, I'm already on board, I'm just trying to find out how to do things a little bit better perhaps.
Hi, Kate.
Hello, Sharon. How are you?
I'm all right. I've stuffed my face now, so apologies, I was off screen.
Awesome. No, we're all very grateful. Thank you.
So I guess just reading about it, I hadn't heard about it in this sense, but when I'm looking at some of the things that you've mentioned, we do elements of it, but we don't call it Agile HR.
And you're under no obligation to do so. The thing that's great about Agile HR, or just Agile or agility or whatever we want to call it, is that you can use certain parts of it that suit your business without having to go the whole hog. So, for example, before we really embraced Agile HR, we were using Kanban, we were using some of the principles of it, but we weren't working in sprints, for example. That came a lot later. So absolutely, Agile is Agile. You can pick things out and try things. And one of the things that I always encourage people to do is to pilot things. See how it goes, see how people respond to it. What's working, what isn't. So yeah, it's really heartening to see that you've already identified that there's some great parts that you can use for your team, which is great. Is there anybody else that wants to give a comment either in chat or be brave like Sharon and just tell me? No? Okay, that's absolutely fine. I'm hearing you loud and clear. Get on with it, Kate. Yeah, I heard that. Thank you. Brilliant. So let's talk about from struggling to thriving, so embracing Agile principles to elevate team performance. I wanted to talk to you about a client that I worked with, and I've just seen your comment, Lorraine. Thank you. I'm familiar with Agile principles, but not seen them applied in a HR context. Brilliant. So you're on the right webinar. You're all right. Fantastic. So yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about about a client that I was working with. So as you can probably imagine, even those of you that haven't been involved in the hospitality industry, most of us have kind of experienced hospitality in some form or another, whether it's in restaurants or we've stayed in hotels or what have you. So we know that it's renowned for quite a fast-paced environment and high customer expectations. Hospitality functions really rely on people speaking well of them. So within this industry, I was working with a sort of a mid-sized hotel chain, and they were facing quite significant challenges in adapting to modern operational demands. So, as you can imagine, there were some real changes that they had to adapt to during COVID, and people's expectations in terms of what they wanted out of this hotel or all hotels had changed quite significantly. There was also quite a lot of legislation changes too, and there's also been hit by things like the national minimum wage rises and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a really complex industry at the moment, and the team were really struggling with sort of a lot of manual processes and quite ineffective communication. And that was exacerbated by the remote nature of their work. So although the hotels themselves were, they had people that were based in each of the hotels, the managers were distributed, the central team were working in a remote or a hybrid way as well. So there was quite a lot of processes that weren't very clear. They were still quite manual, even if they were on online. So for example, they relied 100% on emails, for example. So when I'm talking about manual, I don't just mean paper and pen. I mean, nothing happens unless somebody's actually sort of emailing something, for example. So it was really quite complex and very, very slow, and they needed to be able to respond to customer feedback quickly. They needed to be able to gather feedback quickly. They needed to be able to problem solve really quickly, because they really were in quite a difficult situation. So the other problem that they were facing was that the manual processes were leading to quite a lot of inefficiencies and errors as well. So lots and lots of payroll errors where perhaps absences hadn't been recorded well, where there was some parts of the business that were allowing things like time in lieu, and there were others that weren't. Things like appraisals were really, really lengthy and still were on paper. So that was concerning. Things like return to works weren't being done. There was a management team that were feeling incredibly overwhelmed because they'd had an increase in things like health and safety concerns and all of those kind of things. So things just weren't being done, and when they were being done, they weren't being done in a particularly compassionate or empathetic way. And that in turn was then hindering productivity, service quality. Oh, I've accidentally gone on ahead, trigger finger. And there was also a lot of poor communication. So important information was often being lost or miscommunicated, and that was leading to misunderstandings, delays in decision making, and then a kind of a lack of cohesion in team members. And as you can probably imagine, that was then leading to really quite high attrition, higher than the industry standard, which in itself is quite high for lots of different reasons. So the key problem was with the approach. So we needed really to understand, what the actual problem was, how long it was taking to see the results, and also about how these approaches were being done to people, which was the stance that the hotel was doing. They were kind of saying, right, we're going to do this to improve this, we're going to do that to improve that, and weren't involving people. So people were feeling really disconnected with the solutions that were being put to them. So we looked at having an agile HR approach, and we do things slightly differently with this. So really we look at, as I was alluding to earlier, we look at what the problem is. We look at creating a way of being able to test a hypothesis. For example, we then act on it, and we check and see if it's right, and then we implement, and then we kind of have that continuous cycle. So what can often happen with an agile HR approach is that, for example, there may be 3 things that we might want to do, and one of those things might be something that's quite a long project. For example, so we might break that long project down into different milestones. And we might start with a small project. I'm going to talk about prioritization in a moment, but we might start with a small project. We might make a small improvement, and then we might decide, actually, I think it's a priority to continue with making improvements to this process, or leave it where it is and we look at chipping away at something else that's going to make an impact on people. So you're constantly doing, is this right for people? Do we need to make it better, or is it okay at the moment and we can look at something else that's going to have an impact? But at all times you're checking in with people and you're making sure that you are having that impact. So it's also really important that we're not assuming things. The sort of the phrase "I think therefore I am" doesn't apply here. We want to actually find out, is high attrition, it can be very easy to say, for example, high attrition is caused by poor managers. And then we put in a solution like management training, and actually it's not that they're poor managers, it's because they're not being given enough time to be effective. Or it could be that they haven't been because recruitment, they're constantly recruiting, they're not then able to look after people properly. So then the issue is recruitment rather than managers and not having their skills. So it's really important that you kind of you get to the bottom of the issue. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. One of the ways that a lot of businesses operate is that they can come up with their mission, and they'll have that mission. And I'll give you an example in a moment, but they'll have that mission and they'll say, right, heads of departments, you know what the mission is. You go ahead and do what you need to do with your teams, and create your objectives accordingly, and that kind of disseminates down to individual objectives. So for those people that are perhaps familiar with that, do you want to pop in the chat and say where you think there might be a flaw in that process? Sometimes it works, very much depends on the business, depends on the leadership and the maturity of the leadership team, but having that kind of hierarchical flow of the mission going down to team objectives and then individual objectives, what do you think? Yeah, Sharon, everybody's trying to solve different problems, absolutely. Yeah, anybody else want to jump in? Loss of engagement, ownership, yeah, definitely. It can also lead to conflict, because you've got competing challenges, and sometimes they're not the same. So putting it in kind of blunt language, you might have finance that are being challenged to save money, so they might want to do a recruitment freeze, but then you've got sales that are trying to sell a load more products or what have you, but they can't be made quickly enough, so business is being lost. So there can often be conflicts, and you'd think, but surely, there's somebody there that can stop that from happening, like a CEO, but it's not seen. People don't see that. They're humans as well. So we've also had, Mrs. Ideas, which those at the bottom might have. Absolutely, Peter, that is absolutely critical. Those people that are on the front line, they're the ones that are seeing things for how they actually are. So yeah, absolutely. And then Lorraine's got too high level and not flexible or reactive to change. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If a change is needed, it's going to be quite difficult to turn that boat around, isn't it? So yeah, you're absolutely right. So with Agile, and this isn't the case for all Agile teams, I just wanted to show you sort of how we do it and how I work with clients. We do it the other way. Now, it might look like the same picture, but there's a subtle difference. So you can see that there is still that mission. Businesses are often beholden to shareholders or executive boards or trustees or whatever it is. you know, we need to embrace the fact that there's going to be a commerciality about this. So there is still that mission, whether it's to be the number one widget maker in the world, or you know, whatever it is, you know, there will still be that mission. And that can be cascaded down. But instead of it going down and down and down and down, instead that mission is segregated into, you know, usually 3, possibly 5 objectives, and then the teams, or the leaders of the teams, perhaps in the first instance, are then feeding up what it is that they need in order to what they need to achieve in order to achieve that objective. So does that make sense? Is that something that people have heard of before? I'm going to go into it in a little bit more detail because it opens up a different way of thinking. So has anybody seen that practice, or is this completely new, this concept? Yeah, doing it at organisation now. So that's probably one of the aspects you were talking about, Sharon, sort of looking at some of them. Yeah, definitely. Well, that's great. It's a really great place to start. So that's fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, so what it can open up when you have that kind of, you know, it feels like a subtle shift in mindset, but actually, you know, it's a biggie. And what that does is it opens people up to, oh, I've clicked too soon. And what that does is it opens it up to people saying, okay, so we've got this objective. So what would stop us from achieving that? You know, and it might be that we haven't got the skills in the team. And as you can see, you know, I've just used this as, you know, sort of some functions as an example. But, you know, this is the question that these kinds of groups of people should be asking. So C-suite leadership teams, what would be stopping us from achieving this objective and therefore not achieving the mission? Is it that we don't have the skills in the teams? Is it that we don't have the resources? Is it that the budget isn't reflective of what it is that we need to achieve? You know, is it that, you know, we're in the wrong location? Is it that we have concerns about the industry itself? You know, all of those things. These are the kind of questions that we should be asking. You know, what is it that we need in order to do that? Is it more, you know, is it more resources? Is it less? You know, is it that we need to restructure potentially? And then you can also look at things like that minimum viable product that I was talking about earlier. What would be the least thing that we can do that is going to have the most impact and get us to, you know, get us to closer to our objective and therefore our mission. So when I think back to the hospitality example that I was talking about before, I wanted to kind of you know, kind of show what it was that we did in its basic sort of sense. So we first of all had that discovery, and we asked people to be really open and honest about what their pain points were. So as an external consultant for them, I found that people were able to, you know, to feel a little bit safer with me, to be, you know, really kind of transparent about what it is that they were facing. We made sure that we ran, you know, different focus groups. We used some of the data from a survey that had gone out before, and sort of asked people to go a little bit more in depth. And we included all different stakeholders, so shareholders, board representatives, you know, some of the waiters that were at the restaurants that were attached, housekeeping. You know, we included everybody, and we asked everybody, you know, one question, which was, what do you think is getting in our way from achieving this mission? And then from there, we explored what it was that they were bringing up. So from that, we then created some cross-functional teams. So we paired, you know, sort of marketing and HR and finance together. And we did some brief training on some of the agile approaches and ceremonies, which I'll touch on, so that people could become familiar with, you know, the kind of terminology that we were going to be using, and the fact that we were going to have, you know, transparent processes. So we did that, and then we looked at some of the hypotheses that have been created from the focus groups. So, for example, what people felt was that one of the reasons that they were losing a lot of people was because the onboarding was making people feel undervalued. They felt that the managers didn't have time. They felt that they were thrown in at the deep end. They felt that it wasn't a great environment to start, you know, when everybody was talking about how short-staffed they were. You know, people tensions were there because, especially in, for example, housekeeping, where they're on a real kind of, you know, they've got to get it done before, you know, before 12 o'clock and all of those kind of things. So we looked at some of the pain points, and we applied some hypothesis. So we said things like, okay, so if we were able to provide a way of the housekeeping team being able to communicate with reception as they went along, rather than handing over a paper checklist to say which rooms had been cleaned, would that make an impact on guest satisfaction, for example? So we had lots of little sort of nuggets like that, and we got the cross-functional teams together, and we valued them and we prioritised them. And we looked at things like the end customer engagement and our own employee engagement as well. We're going to talk a little bit about, you know, prioritising and mapping. So that was what we did. So we found the pain points, we created cross-functional teams and trained them, and then we did an exercise on how we could prioritise all of the different challenges that we were facing. Then we started some communication tools. So we used Trello first of all, and we had the process of, you know, what needs to be done, what's in progress, and what has been done and where we were stuck. And we also did some work around psychological safety, so that people felt really comfortable with that kind of real-time visibility. Because with autonomy also comes accountability, and people have to feel comfortable with being able to say, I'm stuck, or I've overestimated or underestimated. And so the leader role becomes more about facilitating those spaces for people to be open and honest, and helping identify areas of support, rather than, you know, asking people why they haven't hit a deadline, or, you know, reflecting only after the event. So we made some improvements through our iterative process, and we had some outcomes and results which helped with efficiency gains, helped with enhanced communications, and ultimately it meant that managers in particular could be more productive, and it had an indirect effect on customer satisfaction, which then, you know, is a really big part of how people are feeling engaged. You know, people get into hospitality because they want to please, you know, customers and clients and what have you. So it did have that direct and indirect effect as well. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, building products. So as I said earlier, you know, we use the word product, but we could also, we could change that to experience, or we could change that to service. But I'll stick with product. So it's something that is being built. So it's building those products that people want, and it's looking at those strategies for innovation and for employee engagement. So the objective of the business was to become the #1 hotel on TripAdvisor, in London in particular. That was their mission. So they'd identified that they needed to improve guest satisfaction, they needed to reduce attrition, that was really having an impact on guests, and they wanted to increase their EBITDA by 20%. So they looked at that, and they looked at things like guest feedback. We had those focus groups that I was talking about, and they looked at ways that they could make that improvement, looking at that particular objective of improving guest satisfaction. And I've massively oversimplified this for the purpose of the time that we've got. But they identified that, you know, getting to know guests better, especially regular ones, having a personal touch, smoother check-ins, improving housekeeping standards. They you know, they felt that those were things that they were in control of and could be improved. They also, you know, were talking about the fact that most of the complaints were about housekeeping. And you know, there were also problems when guests arrived unexpectedly. They felt that a personalised welcome, you know, could be something they could do. And they also recognised that having high attrition meant that there was that lack of continuity. So the kind of solutions that people were coming up with were really quite big bang solutions. So they were, getting, oh, well, our platform doesn't work. So the checking in platform, it doesn't work. We need a new one. We need more training on housekeeping. The housekeeping staff need to get better at being housekeepers, and we need to give incentives to keep staff. That's something that we need to do. But can anybody recognise what might be the problem if we said, right, that's what we're going to do? HR, go away and do them. What might be the problem with these? Because they're not wrong. These things, they may very well need a new check-in platform. It might be rubbish. The housekeepers might need training. And who's not gonna be incentivized by receiving a reward to stay. But what do you think the problem is with these solutions? So feel free to shout up or pop it in the chat.
Are they too broad, Kate? Are they? So
yeah,
I'm thinking of kind of like marginal gains theory. How quickly can you implement some of these?
So if you were to say one word then from what you've just said, what's the problem with that? I'll put you on the spot now. Sorry, I didn't mean
The
to.
breadth, probably. That's not one word.
Breadth could be one. But you did actually use it. Or Gary knows. He's put his hand up.
I know. I don't know. I've just got another theory. It's all about the organisation, nothing about the people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's about what the organisation thinks that the problem is, or what the organisation thinks the solution is. You're absolutely right. The thing that jumps out at me for it though is time. It's going to take time to discover and put out to tender potentially a new platform, get the budget approved to be able to buy it, training people on housekeeping. It's probably going to take a while to put the training program together, and then to see the impact of it is going to take time. So we won't know whether it's worked for a while. And then those incentives, getting that signed off by the board, putting a business case together to say that this is the solution when it's not been tested, you might not get it, all of those kind of things. It takes time. And in the meantime, you've got people that are out there on the front line saying, well, we raised all of these things and we haven't seen any changes. In the meantime, you've got HR going, well, we're trying, we keep pushing, but, to those people, they can't see that. So instead, we look at it in a different way. So one of the things that I like to use is this. When you have something that's a big bang, at what point, if you were building a car and you were following those traditional approaches, at what point in that car build would you be able to use that car to get you from A to B? At what point do you reckon?
At the end.
At the end, yeah, absolutely. So it's not until the car's built that you're able to get from A to B, which means that you won't know whether it's been successful. You won't know whether it can get you from A to B until it's built. Yeah. So instead, when you're thinking about it from an agile perspective, think about it this way, which is that you might want to build a skateboard to get you from A to B. It's not fancy and it's a bit basic, and you're going to get there slowly, but you can at least test it and see how long it will take you to get from A to B, and people will see that you've built something. You then get some feedback, you put some handles on it, and it's going to get you there a little bit safer than perhaps a skateboard. You then get some more feedback, you can make it into a bike. You're still going to get wet getting from A to B, but you can get there somewhat quicker. You then transform it into a sexy motorbike. Not everybody can use it, but it's going to get you there quickly. And then from there, you can make it into a car. Now, I appreciate that, bikes and cars are slightly different, but hopefully you've followed me on this concept. And that's really what it's about. At the end of it, you've got a product that is going to be received well because you've been testing it and you've been asking people. So people are going to use it. that it works. It's going to keep you dry because it's got a roof on it. Rather than that sort of big bang approach of building something 18 months later, you launch it and then you're like, well, why is nobody using it? You know, and I've been there and I know how frustrating that is. So that's the kind of MVP route. So if we're looking, you know, at this hospitality case study that I was talking about, you know, and again, I've massively oversimplified it. You know, we're looking at some of the solutions that people have put in, and we've looked at the value of it. We've looked at the, you know, at prioritising it, and you know, we can come up with some hypotheses. And it also means that you can look at things and go, okay, so we know that training's important, and we know that it's important to keep people updated and upskilled, but you know, we don't want to be delivering training if we're also going to change the processes. We want to be changing the processes first and then give the training. That's the most effective thing to do. So, you know, with those those housekeepers, for example, we could have rolled them out to be better housekeepers, you know, and taught them how to, you know, how to make the beds better potentially. But if the real problem with the housekeeping was that, you know, they're spending, you know, 15 minutes out of every hour filling in a really long form to declare that they've done things properly, then really we need to be looking at that as, you know, is it that's not giving them enough time to make the bed properly, or is it that they don't know how to make a bed? You know, we need to identify what the problem is so that we give the training that's appropriate. So it's really good to be able to kind of map things out like this, because then you can sort of start to think about a sensible order of doing things as well. So when we were doing it, we were sort of saying, okay, so to get a new platform, you know, that will be great for HR. It'll be a lot easier for HR, but actually that's going to cause some you know, a bit of chaos for the front line. Is that the right thing to do right now? You know, and it is going to require a lot of effort, and we won't get the gains until later on. But something like, you know, calling guests by their name, that's something that could have a really big impact and actually is quite easy to do, and might make people feel welcome. And we can start that off straight away. You know, and that's a really quick win to help people feel that they've been listened to. So then we looked at, okay, so what's the problem that a new platform might solve? And people saying, well, it means that people can go on and they can check off rooms in real time and reception can see them. So if somebody turns up unexpectedly, they can put somebody in there and potentially charge a premium for allowing people to go into the room early. So there's a bit of a, you know, money-making exercise there. Or it could just be a value add. So instead of doing a platform, can we do that using Microsoft Forms? Let's explore that and see if we can. And we could. We were able to open up a form every day that the housekeeping supervisor was able to tick off in real time, that the reception could look at and say, oh, I can see room number 12 is free. So it's not particularly sexy, you know, it's Microsoft Forms, but it really transformed that guest experience, and it helped people get into the mindset of, you know, what can we do with the tools that we have. So hopefully that's sort of given you a bit of an idea. And we did this as well, and I'm very conscious of the time, but we did this as well for reducing the attrition. So again, you know, there was kind of like this concept that, oh, it's because we've got really bad managers. You know, everybody's leaving because the managers are just terrible. And, you know, let's be honest, there were a couple that weren't great. But for the rest of them, they were really struggling with keeping on top of everything. So, you know, we looked at some of the ideas, you know, is it the pay, poor onboarding, manager complaints, you know, they're dealing with a lot of complaints, which is taking them away from everything. Poor offboarding, you know, the hotel was a little bit guilty of just, you know, oh, you're dead to me now, off you go to our competitor, which didn't, you know, which didn't leave a great taste in people's mouths. We also identified that there was one particular hotel that was really suffering with high attrition, and the hotel was being quite guilty about, you know, applying training across the board, even for those people that didn't need them, because it was easier to do that than it was to, you know, single somebody out. So we identified that. We also identified that there was long recruitment times, which was then having a knock-on effect of being short-staffed and all of that kind of stuff. So again, that theory that we were talking about before, people were saying, oh, well, we need to use better agencies. The agencies that we're using, they're rubbish. They're giving us rubbish people. We need more HR staff. That'll make it much quicker in terms of the recruitment times. The managers need more training. We need a new recruitment platform, all of those things, all of which could be true and, you know, for sure are contributing. And those are things that we can work towards. But what can we do right now? You know, we applied the same thing and we looked at it and we said, okay, so something we can do that's relatively low effort, but it's going to have you know, sort of a medium value to the end user, is we can look at automating some of the key processes. So we looked at things like return to work, notification that somebody was absent, submitting a sickness form, notifying of shift change, notifying of a change to contract. For example, somebody was moving to a different shift. We automated all of those, and we were able to do that iteratively, but we did it, you know, we did one, got some feedback, etc., etc. But within a month, we were able to automate those key processes, which freed up the managers, and it actually gave them 4 hours per manager back a week, which was massive for them. So just doing that one thing. Now we were quite lucky because I could do that myself. So I appreciate that not everybody has the skills to be able to do that, but we were able to do that. We also implemented the Microsoft Forms to keep track of rooms, which was really transformative. And if you look on the right hand side, you can see that, you know, one of the things that's going to take quite a bit of effort, but we felt was really high value, was onboarding review. So we don't just want to focus on quick wins. We do want to get started on some of those, you know, high value ones as well, and break that down. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that separately and how we did that, I'd be happy to. But you can see that, you know, by automating some of those processes, is there still a need for extra HR staff, for example? There wasn't, because when we automated it, we looked at it from both angles. So that gave HR staff the opportunity to spend their time in person with people. So then we look at making accountability desirable. So the way that we do that, and the way that we did that was with that onboarding review, for example. So we knew that we wanted to reduce that attrition. We got our cross-functional team together, and we started to use that kind of transparency to make people aware of what they were achieving, what their peers were achieving, and gave people that safe space to be able to, you know, put the hand up if they were stuck. So you take it from left to right. You look at what needs to be done. You've already prioritised it and put it in order. People then pull tasks to themselves, and they say, well, I can do, you know, I'm really good at Microsoft Forms, so I can do that. I'm really good at administration, so I'll look at the, you know, offer letters, for example. And people then pull that to themselves. They declare it to be in process. When it's done, they say that it's done. And if they're stuck, then they move it into stuck. And then you have this kind of servant leadership where a leader, you know, will be looking at this and saying, okay, how can I help people, and how can I, you know, move things on, for example. So we did that by sprinting. So we asked people at the beginning, you know, of all of these things that need to be done, what do we think can be done in 2 weeks? Guaranteed, happens every time. Everybody overestimates and they think they can change the world in 2 weeks. They never can. But as you go through that cycle, you get better at knowing when people are likely to have over or underestimated. So that's something we used, and I use Trello, but you can also use Microsoft Planner. There are other ones as well. So the last one that's really important when you're looking at sort of agile methodologies and how that can help with high performing teams is, you know, finding ways to be transparent. So that kind of Kanban board that we just had was a way. But other ways of doing it is to do things like daily stand-ups, you know, asking people, you know, to declare, you know, how they're getting on. And what's really good about it is that you can have this agreement with people to say that we will assume that everything is okay unless you tell us otherwise. So you're both giving them the autonomy, but also you're making them responsible for that communication. So I've been on some stand-ups where people will say, absolutely fine, nothing to declare, haven't achieved anything other than move something forward, don't need any help, thanks, see you tomorrow. You know, and if it's found at a later date that wasn't correct, it gives you something to be able to focus on when you're looking at, giving some more support or training somebody. So it's really good. The other thing that we use are retros. So that forward thinking retrospective of saying, how are we doing? What's frustrated us as a team over this period. You have to do some psychological safety. Sometimes it can feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's really important that you're not pointing the finger at anybody. One of the things about Agile is that you believe that everybody's doing their best. So you're not pointing the finger, but you can say things like, it was frustrating that I wasn't able to get a decision made for 2 weeks. You don't have to say Kate was the blocker, for example, but you can say it was frustrating, and then you can look at, well, why was that? Why did it take 2 weeks? What was the issue there? Let's see if we can resolve that for the next time that we work together. You can also look at things like, how did we get on in terms of our communication, and did we over or underestimate? Did we fail in our mission because we prioritised ineffectively? All of those kind of things. It's a great way of really sort of asking ourselves, did we do this right? And there's loads of ways of doing retrospectives. You can do sort of like the rose and thorn. You can do stop, start, continue. There's lots of different ways of doing it. I always like to have a bullseye, and that's my absolute favourite. So as I alluded to before, it helps you with understanding as leaders, what's the can't, won't dilemma? Is it that people can't do it, or is it that they won't do it? Having that kind of transparency really helps as a leader to understand where that support is, and identifying those people that perhaps need more training, or perhaps are displaying an individual mentality rather than a team mentality, and perhaps how you can intervene on that. And it also helps with problem solving virtually as well, by going through that cycle of identifying the problem, gathering the data, analysing it, having solutions, implementing and testing, and what have you. So hopefully that has given you, sort of a bit of an insight into how I've used Agile to help with that particular client of mine. And you should, sort of recognise some of the terms that I've used. So in terms of how we can help, with clients moving forwards, I've already talked about that. We do leadership development. We have Agile in HR courses, and also I often support leadership teams that are going through periods of change as well. We do things like psychological safety training, leading on a change project, mergers, streamlining and automating processes for busy HR teams. That's my favourite. Reducing micromanagement is also something I do as a reformed micromanager myself. I recognise that micromanagers often tend to be passionate people, but I can help with that too, and all development projects and what have you.